Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Meeting Protocol Monthly podcast, where we chat with some of the coolest people in the business and bring you useful and relevant information about what's happening in the world of meeting planning. I am Dora Figueredo, the head of events and education at Meeting Protocol, coming to you as always from my living room in New Jersey. Over the last 2.5 years, I've had the opportunity to interview amazing people who focus on logistical aspects of event planning and other amazing people who specialize in sales. And it's pretty rare that I get to talk to someone who has actually done both in their career because most people, when they start with one, that's generally what they stick with for the rest of their career because we are, I guess, creatures of habits and also specialization. And in addition to wearing both of these event hats, today's guest has also founded and managed both her own agency and an online community focusing on wellness. So we've got the most perfect, well-rounded guest here. Probably her resume would be ideal for a lot of folks who are looking for people for their teams. So I am so thrilled to introduce you all to Alyssa Hart, the current global sales manager for Other Agency, THR Agency, an innovative creative production agency specializing in global events with elevated planning and production requirements. Other Agency is part of the Other Management Company umbrella, a portfolio company that also includes a destination management company, or DMC, a retail agency, and a meeting management company that also specializes in conference and trade show management. So she has done it all, and her company has done it all. So thank you so much, Alyssa, for being with us today. Tell us where you're joining us from and the background of what got you into events.
Yeah, well, for starters, I want to tell you have a great podcast voice, and also
Thank
to
you.
say you make me sound really good on paper, so I'm grateful for that.
You are
Um,
also really great in real life, though, I promise.
oh, thank you. Well, I'm tuning in from Austin, Texas. I've been here for coming up on 8 years, which I think has gone by really fast. But I think most people would attest it's a city that's changed a lot, and that's kind of where I got my start in events. So I actually moved to Austin after this is kind of a weird journey, but I actually flipped a 100-year-old Victorian house back where I'm from in Michigan. And so when I moved to Austin, I had some money in my pocket and took what I call like my quote unquote mini retirement. And when that was up, I had like in that first year I was here, met so many like especially creative women. And so I wanted to be in a more creative field. Up to that point, I'd kind of just had very odd jobs out of college. I went to college for sociology and political science, wasn't really sure what I had planned to do with that. And so I actually got my first job in events was working for a boutique rental company in Austin. So oddly enough, in my career, I've only ever worked for like 30 and under, like kind of small businesses. And so I was there for 3 years and just got to wear a ton of different hats from like, you know, marketing to sales to like managing all the logistics for my orders to, being on site and just an interesting journey to get here. I feel like I always joke that I make life choices by like the right, kind of seeing what doors open and kind of walking through them. And it's been so odd kind of having my event industry and kind of career and network both grow in Austin and kind of the odd path to get here. So I think you mentioned that, included a whole like COVID journey, kind of doing my own virtual events and then getting back into IRL events, leaving that vendor side from the production side.
Yeah.
So I think you summed it up well. But yeah, my unconventional start, it's certainly not something I went to college for or like started my career in. I just really desired to be in like a more creative space. And I think, wanted to be around more creative women, honestly.
I love that you mentioned the women thing multiple times. I now am in my 40s. I've had a lot of jobs, and I can't believe I've made it this far with only female managers. No, in no job, not even like my college jobs and like
hmm
my high school jobs, no man has ever managed me. It's very rare.
That's actually interesting. I'm literally in the beginning of January going to have my first male manager ever. We
Oh
just
my
hired a
gosh.
new director of I think it's like director of client experience. So thankfully it's someone I know. I got really nervous when they told me I was getting a new boss, but
Good luck with
but yeah, I
that.
think
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of girl power going on in our industry. I don't know if that's like cheesy to say, but I think it's pretty well known.
Yeah, that's true. I have interviewed a lot of women for this podcast. It's I think it's what do I want to say? I find that event management isn't necessarily considered a caretaker career, like the way people would say nurses or teachers are caretakers. But I do really believe that event planning is that. And I wonder if that's
Hmm.
maybe one of the reasons a lot of women gravitate towards it because, we do have to we take care of our attendees. We figure out their needs. We figure out their wants. We give them, what they need for a comfortable and safe experience. And so even though it's not categorized as such, I really believe that we're doing caretaker type work.
I think we're also inherently like great at multitasking and like moving
Okay.
through things really quickly. And I think that that is like a prerequisite for success in our industry.
Yeah, that's
um,
fair.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead into my questions. When we
Yeah,
first chatted a couple months ago at this point, time is not real. I have no idea how long ago that was.
it's not.
You mentioned that you worked exclusively for companies under 30 employees, which you also just mentioned in your
Yeah.
intro now. So, what is the benefit of working for a smaller business? Is it something that you gravitated towards, or it just so happened to be that way in your career?
I think so. I think just in my life in general, I like shy away from like things that feel very rigid. And so I never really pictured myself like I think when you work for a small business, you really can feel the impact that every single person has. And I'm not saying you don't feel that at a big company. I think there's tons of resources and usually there's like a lot of investment in making sure like the best people are in every seat. But I think I've just always gravitated towards that because you really get to know those people and you get to learn a lot really quickly. And I think I'm just motivated by the constant need to just like grow and evolve and meet new people and like be challenged in different ways. And I think that that's kind of what, is also built a lot of my relationships in this industry is like being in the trenches with people and like learning new skills from them. And when you show up for them, they want to return the favor. So I think, from like being on the vendor side and learning about like event logistics and like rental industry, like learning other vendors and seeing how different planners work, like I just got to be a sponge. And I felt the same way when I joined, kind of the umbrella of businesses I'm in now. Like you mentioned, the rental company in my intro, like the reason we have a rental business is because I did an event my first year at Other where I had to last minute acquire 6 figures worth of furniture because there was not enough rental inventory.
Oh my
And
gosh.
because that was my background, I was able to kind of help consult my boss on like, okay, well, what do we do with this now? Like, let's start a business. We have this asset. Um,
That's
and so
amazing.
it
That's
is
such a
weird,
cool
but it's
story.
like, when you like these things you're not like intentionally trying to do and they kind of like come back around. So that's what I love. And I think, the reason I just had my 3 year with my company in November, end of November. And I just love being like building something with a group of people. And, I think a lot of people just don't do that anymore. They kind of just hop around and I think there's, lots of positives for that and everyone has to do what's right for them. But I kind of like the challenge of like being in it with a group and trying to like build something together.
Yeah, I love that. Being in the trenches with somebody is a very accurate way to describe a lot of event teams, I think. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Um, I know that you love to help people advocate for themselves, and not all event planners are introverts, but in my experience, many logistics-oriented folks prefer to sort of stay in the background. How do you advise other planners to not just build their network, but manage and keep those relationships alive? And I feel like because you have worked on such small teams, like that relationship building is so important. So I'd love to hear how you manage that.
Yeah, I love that question. I always joke about like, we have like the creative agency team and then we have like our meeting and conference logistic team. And those teams are like completely different people, right? Like you have the creatives on one side and then you have like all the detailed introverted people on the other side. And I think it's the same way I like have always gravitated towards being around creative people because I don't think I'm inherently creative, but I am like an amplifier of like things I believe in. And so like a lot of creatives aren't like good sales people or like, they might be like more on the introverted side. I think same thing for like highly detailed people. And so what I like about that team dynamic is kind of like picking up what those different people need. Like I would like to think, spending this many years with more introverted team members, like they've absorbed things from me that have hopefully like maybe helped them become more outgoing. I've seen it like some of them start posting on LinkedIn more because they might see how I do it. And it might feel like, okay, maybe I can find a way to do this that's like authentic to me. And I think I learn a lot from them too. Like I think working with more introverted people has like taught me to listen more and kind of listen differently. And um, I think, you know, I've learned a lot in the last few years, even just seeing some of these people work. Like sometimes when you don't always share your voice, like when you do speak up, people really listen. And so I think I kind of just try to like observe and soak in and like hope that I pay the same thing forward to other people. I don't know if I kind of lost your question.
No, no, that's great. I worked for an organization for a long time that had a lot of sort of self-proclaimed introverts.
Hmm.
And something that I learned while I was working there that a lot of people are uncomfortable with outside of that organization, and I still continue doing it even though I've been gone for a few years, is I just stay silent. Like if you're in a group meeting and you ask a question and nobody answers, sometimes it just takes some people like a minute or 2 or 3 minutes to answer. And so it was very difficult at first, but I became really comfortable with just staying silent because a lot of people, it's only after like 7 or 8 seconds, maybe, that they say, okay, that's it, no comments, great. And they close out or move topics. And the person who was kind of like trying to build up to saying something never actually got to say that thing that they wanted to say. So I think it's what you're saying is really important is when you're trying to connect with introverts, there's like lots of ways that you can make that space for them.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think about like I feel like the other big challenge of people in our industry that are more introverted or like prefer being in the work than like outside is like so much of marketing right now is like people need to the CEO needs to be like in every reel and it needs to be like super
Yeah.
personal. And
Yeah,
I
that's
some of the
true.
best people I know in this industry aren't like that and don't want to be forward facing and they're like really they're effing great at the work. They want to be in the work like and they don't want to participate in that. And I think it's tough because the highest visibility is for the people who have set that up. And I think it's a marketing challenge that a lot of companies probably face, especially smaller agencies right now. I know it's something we face. Like I'm trying to get our like owners and managing directors to like use their voice on LinkedIn more, and some of them just don't like it's so uncomfortable for them.
Right. And so maybe they don't even have their own Facebooks or Instagrams. And now you're telling them to like talk to millions of followers that
Yeah.
they
And
don't
now I'm
know.
like, talk about your family on LinkedIn. Like they're like, what? No. Like I just want to do good work. And I'm like, well, now people want this. So
Right. Yeah. If you want to sell, now you got to get in front of the camera.
it's really tough. Like people don't even care about like company LinkedIn. Like it's just kind of proof, social proof if they end up there, but people care more about like personal and it has to feel authentic too. So you got to find like a comfortable way. I think that's a big challenge for us in the industry where a lot of people like are more comfortable in the work than like outward facing.
That's very true. One time at a job interview, I was asked something about my strengths. I can't remember the exact question, but I basically said, there's architects and then there's a construction workers that put up the buildings, and I am very much a construction worker. And I remember that person being like, "Can you be an architect?" And I was like, "Sure, if that's what you really need." But I applied for this job because it sounded like a construction worker, you know. So everybody has their own strengths, but yes, at this time, everybody's got to come out of their comfort zone a little bit, I think.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
do like your point. I think it's a big challenge, like when you're in those dynamics to not like constantly validate them. And like for me, I like am the self-proclaimed extrovert on the team. At least that's what like my line is when I'm at conferences. I'm like, well, I'm the extrovert. They pedal out everywhere. But I do think like having those opportunities to like take a step back and see who steps forward is super important.
Yeah. Well, you are in a sales role right now,
Mhm.
which is natural for, I think, a lot of extroverts. That's not a hard and fast rule, but I think can be sort of generalized. And I want to discuss sales in relation to authentic relationships. So, calling back to the earlier question a little bit, um, some of your past job titles, looking at your LinkedIn, have included strategic relationships, which I
Yeah.
found super interesting. So, what is a strategic relationship in this industry, and how do you manage those professional relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I moved into sales from being a producer, which A was like never a chain, like never something I like foresaw really, like being in a sales position and like doing like cold LinkedIn messages or like posting on LinkedIn all the time. So for from a strategic relationship point, I feel like, my previous version of that, like it was built with some of those clients where you had repeat business with them. And, especially on the DMC side, like your bread and butter from a sales standpoint is with like, big third party relationships, whether that's like marriage or prestige or like the hotel relationships, and just that investment. So to me, that's just like knowing what your sales pipeline is and um, trying to foster like authentic connections within there. I think it's easy for me because I like genuinely like people. And I think, I'm grateful to be somewhere where someone saw that in me and thought that this was a good segue for me, where I was already like organically bringing back repeat business of like, oh, what if we can foster this skill set like in this other way? Um, so I think in the industry it's tough because you never know where people are going to pivot and move in their careers, and that's why like um it's tough because you want to like be targeted, but you also those long-term connections can also kind of come back around. So yeah, that's really tough. I think managing the professional relationship piece, like I'm trying to do a better job at like documenting it. So for next year, for some of our sales goals, like I'm putting like in a spreadsheet, like how many touch points I want with these people, per year, and then like reminders of those dates. So it's kind of more systematized because I'm at a point in my life where if it's like not written down somewhere, it's just easy for the time to go by. I don't know if you're there. Like if I don't put something in my calendar, I cannot remember it
Yes,
anymore.
basically if my phone or computer is not dinging at me, I'm not I'm not doing that thing.
Yeah, and so I think the getting those things on paper and even my friends with businesses like outside of what we do, if I'm having conversations with that, it's like whether you work with sponsors, like how are you, if you work with sponsors for your event, how are you tracking like the return on investment for them? Is there like other ways for you to improve that will help you in that conversation the next year, even if there's someone new in the seat managing that and your contact has gone away. So I think that's an interesting kind of thing to think about. Like sometimes you're managing that strategic relationship. Is it the person? It's like the person in that seat, and you've got to figure out how to leverage that if there's a new person in that seat, like every single year,
That's
which
true.
does happen.
Yeah, that's very true. Oh, when I used to work trade shows, sometimes my account folks, like the account managers, like every year at the same trade show, I'd get a new one. And I'm like, wait, I just started to get to know the other guy.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We just did an event that it's like a 2 to 3 thousand person conference. I think they used to have like bigger numbers pre-COVID, but on our meeting and conference management side, our managing director has been a part of this event for 16 years.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, and so she's literally like the most tenured person that works there, but she's like their agency partner. And so even like having the historical and things where like a new person comes to that seat and we're still able to kind of articulate the value that we've brought over those years. So that's an odd one. Yeah, sometimes it is like the person and sometimes it's like the seat.
Yeah, that's
We
true.
got to figure out
It sounds like she has more institutional knowledge than the people who are taking those jobs.
100%. So the
Um,
right people will see that and like know how to harness it.
that's true. That's very true. Like one of the questions I had written down for you was how you see other folks in the industry trading authenticity for the sake of building a sales Rolodex, right? And it sounds like this person, she may as well be working for that company, because she's
Hmm.
got so much experience with doing events for them. But I think that um, a lot of people do just kind of collect potential clients, and I'd love to know how you manage or help other people manage like true authenticity. Like you're not just a person I'm trying to make a sale for. Like I don't know, maybe that doesn't exist. Maybe that that is what it is. You are just trying to make a sale to that person. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's tough. I just did a LinkedIn post about this a couple of weeks ago because it's something I think about. Like there are things on LinkedIn, maybe this isn't the right way to say, but I'm like, maybe give me the ick like a little bit. Like sometimes when I'm like, people are just a little too good at LinkedIn, if that makes sense, where
Yes.
And I think that's, I don't, maybe that's my jealousy because I'm not a person that can sit in like a 3 hour block and write like 2 months worth of LinkedIn posts and plan it that way. Like if I write something on LinkedIn, it's like in the moment, I'm like, it's leaving my brain. I'm writing it down, spending a few minutes like and hitting go on it. And I feel like that's how I come across authentically. But it's tough because then I see other people where they're like absolutely killing it. I think it's just like a you find your people in some ways.
Mhm.
Um, but I think where it feels like less authentic to me is when I feel like, someone's just like systematized this.
Yeah,
Um, but maybe I'm just salty because I don't have the skill set. Does
that's
that make
true.
sense? I feel like, I'm just I want I think there's a desire, especially like post COVID, to like have that integration of like your full self with work. And I
Hmm.
think when people come across and they're just like, wow, this person feels like they have like no mental health issues or like no problem, like they're just like a well-oiled machine.
Hmm.
I think that's where I'm like, what's going on behind the curtain? Like this just seems like too good, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a perfect seg into my next question. Um, because in 2021, you quit your job at the time in order to create Sober Voices, which
Hmm.
helps pull back the curtain for people, I think,
Yeah.
to like really be authentic. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that project.
Yeah, so I'm 7 years sober. I hit my 7 years at the end of July, which is crazy. Like that's the longest I've done anything other than like own my dog. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And so one of my best friends from college is actually like started her sobriety a few months after me. And during COVID, there was I would call it like sober Instagram, which was like a very active, supportive community. And it was a community that, as like a cisgendered straight white woman, was like very easy for me to tap into and like find myself represented when I kind of wanted to see like a version of sobriety that looked right, like look appealed to me. And for my friend who's like a queer woman, it was like much more difficult for her. And so we were kind of feeling like in 2020, like this was like a little bit of an echo chamber and just started ideating on what a community could look like outside of social media that wasn't as homogenous and really kind of gave that authentic voice. So we built Sober Voices kind of around that ethos. So it was started as this event. The first one was in February of 2021. We ended up doing one in the fall and worked with like an inclusivity advisor. Majority of the speakers were like non-white, non-cis. We had, sessions like Brothers in Recovery, where it was like a panel of all Black men talking about like what recovery means to them. Um, like a panel on like religion and recovery, and it was sort of marketed towards people who like across the range, like sober curious, Cali sober, like fully sober. And so for me it was kind of like we met a need at that time, and I know that's something like we talked about too. And um, it was just like the most expansive year for me, and also kind of took the experience I had in events and really like put that to test because it was like two of us driving all of this. And like 3 days of virtual events, like 80 sessions, half pre-recorded, half live. We did all the branding, I did all the contracting. Thankfully I know a lawyer who could like help me with that for free. That's where I became a self-proclaimed Canva queen. But it was just like an odd season of life where like I was like self-motivating myself to overwork when no one was asking me to. But we built something really beautiful. It was just this like gorgeous, expansive year. And then kind of concluded, in 2021 when we finished the second event. It was kind of tough. Like we just did too much and we were kind of burnt out. And then I think we were getting kind of tired of virtual the same time like the whole world was, and kind of happened organically. Like my business partner got a job in tech, and then my now boss, who like owns our umbrella, was my client pre-COVID, and she had literally been like tapping my shoulder for like 9 months of 2021. And so I finally like answered the call and took a producer role.
Great. And here you are now. The
Yeah,
rest is history.
I know. And I think something we talked about, I think when I took that job, I really anticipated like being able to do both. And it was an interesting journey. Like I'm so proud of what I built, and I think I wanted to carry it out. Like not through like it serving a need because it really didn't have a need anymore. And it took me really some time to like come to terms with that, where like wanting to do another version of it was kind of out of guilt. And so it
Mm.
was an interesting thing to like just let it exist in its own like little perfect chapter and like
Hmm.
move forward
Yeah.
and that be okay.
Yeah, I think that's a totally normal feeling and also a little bit of a symptom of our like hustle and grind culture of
Oh
like
yeah, we're
this has
like,
to
I
be
want to squeeze
bigger.
everything out of this.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Do you still keep in touch with folks that you met then? Like, is there still a community going as far as you know that maybe is just not led by anybody?
There's, I would say it's like kind of, I've seen it like trickle out in its own little like beautiful web. I mean, I certainly keep up with a lot of people on social media. I think that's where like I don't want to say the word regret, but I like do miss a lot of these people. I think when you connect with people on something that's so like a core part of them, it is like a really true connection. And I went from that to like 2022 and was like I honestly like a year of like burnout for me, especially with events just roaring back to states like Texas, where the regulations post COVID were so much lower. So
Right.
the other piece of that was like just a capacity piece for me, and I kind of moved on, and my business partner, had a baby and like started her own life adventure, and so part of that, it almost feels like like college friends or like exes
Yeah.
where you just like think of them and you just like wish them love and keep up with them on socials, but
That's a
I
really
always think
lovely analogy.
I always think about this, like, people who meet, like, you could probably think about this with events too, like actors and people who meet each other, like working on like film or TV show projects, how hard it must be when you like leave there and you like think that they're gonna, probably like when you leave a job and you think you'll be like best friends with those people.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't like diminish the significance of it to just like have your lives go in different directions.
Yeah. I understand that. I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. Read the books growing
Same.
up, watched all the movies, great. And in September, I was in Ottawa. It just so happened to be during Comic-Con week in Ottawa. And at my hotel, I saw Sean Astin, um, Elijah Wood, and I can't remember his name. The guy who played Pippin. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, like having breakfast together. And I thought, and what I wonder if they're, obviously they were there because of Comic-Con, but they were like in a really lively conversation and they were hanging out in the breakfast room for a couple hours. And I did think to myself, are they friends? Do they talk outside of this? Is this like, oh yeah, we get together during Comic-Cons and catch up? To your point of, a movie can be a really intense experience and like you kind of leave expecting like we're going to be best friends forever, and something
Yeah.
like Lord of the Rings in particular was very intense and epic. So I would love to know what if they keep up with each other personally.
Yeah. It is interesting. Like, I think a lot of people probably feel this, like from COVID or even like LinkedIn connections, like when when you're with someone and you finally get to like meet them in person at a conference, like that beautiful moment. But there are
Yeah.
people from that chapter of my life where I like feel like I've actually met them in person and I haven't. And I like, you would like ask about them and their kids, like you're like best friends.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah, it sounds like you
sometimes
created a deep and meaningful connection with a lot of these folks.
yeah, and I think that's my goal in general. I'm like, we're all gonna die someday. Like, I don't want things to just be surface level for like every interaction I'm in.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
yeah.
So along the lines of sober voices, do
Hmm.
you see people advocating for more sober or sober friendly events than you did before? And what has been the biggest shift that you've seen in the space, especially when compared to other wellness trends? I feel like there was a while where there were like smoothie bars or
Hmm.
massage chairs. What are you seeing in the sober space and events?
Yeah, I actually did an event at IMAX about this. So we partnered with Caesars Entertainment and hosted kind of a non-alcoholic, inclusive offsite with a panel, kind of discussing this, like the sober movement and events. And my team and I were kind of motivated to make this happen. I think I saw definitely this year in 2024, people start to talk about this more in our industry than I had like ever seen. Um, and a lot of people that I saw were like the very active like LinkedIn like trends and influencers, and some of them I'm like they're not even fully sober. So I think there was a drive for me to like have people in that discussion where this has like really impacted their lives. Um, because I think that's a whole part of it. And I always want people who are like kind of in a group, kind of driving the discussion about that group. Um, and the panel went really well. It was like a highly attended event. And I think where I see those trends making a ton of traction is, and I was just talking to like a whole group of event producers at a company about this last week. They were like, what do you think is the proof in this that it's like gaining traction? I'm like, well, Budweiser and like all these other companies would not have non-alcoholic products if it wasn't like a viable market.
Yeah.
Um, but that said, I think, like you said, there's tons of progress with trends like sustainability and healthy eating options. Like those are now just like, I feel like part of like venue and hotel sales pitches to like showcase what efforts they're making.
Mhm.
And this feels like one that's so secondary. And a lot of those are from like the challenges of like these the big contracts that a lot of like alcohol companies have at large venue spaces. So hoping that was just that discussion was just like a first driver because I do think the onus is on event producers and people that like are in that contracting place to like start early in the front to make that like a value prop for your company and your team the same way you need to like showcase this is like I said the sustainability efforts of your program and um, healthy eating options or food allergies. I think is like this level of inclusivity and it's needed because generally whether people are you know, alcoholic, choosing not to drink, whatever, people are just drinking less than they were before.
Mhm. Yeah, that's right. One of my all-time favorite podcasts is How I Built This with Guy Raz, and he recently
I love
interviewed.
Guy Raz.
I
Sorry,
know
go on.
it's great, right? And he recently interviewed the CEO of Athletic Brewing Company, which is a non-alcoholic beer company. Yes,
It's
yes,
so
big heart.
good.
And his story is amazing because everybody was like, no, like person after person, brewer after brewer was like, no, this is not gonna take off. And now
Mm-hmm.
he's got, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but he's got a pretty huge market share. And like you just said, Budweiser, Heineken, et cetera, all of these really big brewing companies now have a non-alcoholic option. And I really credit him, the CEO, with driving that because he did not give up and he was like, I can't be the only person out there who wants to go to a party and have something that's not alcoholic, that's not water, you know?
Yeah, and I think part of this, like, I want to think positively about like why it's taken so much time. I think as an industry, we were probably like a lot of people were like stressed and understaffed, and those things become just like boxes they have to check, and they're like very busy planning timelines. So I would like to think, hopefully that people are just in like a more collective like place in like in event planning. I don't know, maybe that's overly hopeful, where people can start to kind of think about these other pieces of inclusion at an event and other pieces of attendee experience outside of like registration and all these other things. Like what are other ways where whether like subliminally or very explicitly like telling people that they're not included or they're not worthy of our consideration. And I think
Mhm.
that's a heavy piece of it.
And it's not even that difficult. It's not that
It's
difficult
really
to,
not.
right?
I
Like,
was telling someone last week, I'm like, first of all, people, whether they're drinking or not, want more like flavor options. Like in all beverage, like the flavor category is the only category experience any growth right now in the beverage industry. And so if that's like a crafted cocktail menu, then make one where it's very clear that you can make it alcoholic or not. Like easy done.
right, right. And there's like, even if you aren't into creating a crafted cocktail or mocktail menu, like Mingle makes really excellent mocktails, right? And they're canned. So like
100%.
you don't have to do anything. You don't have to create a special menu. Just have your distributor or your caterer order those. There's so many options out there. And this isn't just for alcohol and non-alcoholic drinks. Like you said earlier, food inclusivity, like having a vegetarian meal that is not just like bread and vegetables or like a mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
As a vegetarian myself, uh, the number of times I go into a restaurant and I see that the only vegetarian option is a portobello burger, I'm like, no, no, that's a mushroom. That's not a burger. Get out of here. It's really not that hard to create. Just to have a couple options, even if every event if you have an annual event and year over year you choose the same vegetarian options. Well, as long as you're not getting bad feedback on it, and people tend to eat it, there's just do it. Just add it. Just do the same thing every year. Make it easy on yourself. And that's also inclusive.
Well, and I think the feedback and the data piece of it is so important. I think that goes back to like the relationships comment is like if you do your event and you add mocktails for the first time, like what are you doing? Are you actually going to review the consumption report after to see like how that broke down? Um, and that, even your comment about the menu made me think of an event we did. We've worked on Dropbox's design summit for a few years, which is like a dream client because it's like designing an experience for creative people. But 1 year for their offsite dinner, it was a color theme. So it was like in a big photo studio. Every course had a color where the whole room was saturated, and the drink that, well, actually, I think it was just a food menu, but like it was all the food was the same color. So, if you were doing that with like cocktails, then the drink should be just as big of a part of the experience. And so would like the meat or the non-meat option would all be a part of that. So I feel like people in the industry like want to work on that type of thing. And, the more you can just like invest in the work that you're actually doing, like how can I enrich this piece a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are reaching the end here, so I'm going to ask you our this usual final closing question. What is the
Okay.
coolest event that you've been to, either as an attendee or as the planner slash producer?
Ooh, I feel like I should bring up the one people always want to talk to me about when they hear about it. Because I feel like the coolest event I've been to was also like the hardest event I've ever worked on in my life. That was like honestly a crazy life experience. So at Other, I started as a producer in November, and in April we did the Tesla factory grand opening in
What?
Austin.
That is
Yeah,
so cool.
which was a 15,000 person event planned in a very short timeline. Like, yeah, very short. Like, and so it was just one of those ones where like you're not at an event site, like the actual location of the event was like on the second floor of a factory, literally on the opposite side is the freight elevator. So there were just like all these logistical things where like everything that could be hard was. And it was just like one of those crazy things I can't believe I went through. Like I even contracted my partners in events and we contracted him to be part of it. And we have like our his and hers Tesla hard hats still hanging up because we like made it through that. But the
Fun
actual
souvenir.
event was so incredible. Like it was like a once in a lifetime thing. I know that that company, for a variety of reasons, is like not as popular now. And we don't have to get into that, but it was one where we got to give a ton of business to like local vendors here in Austin. It was very like highly creative. We got to work with for the large set pieces a designer who does like fashion show design by trade. Because the factory wasn't open yet, there was a whole custom lighting tour that took like a week for this lighting designer to load in. And just that was so I just got to work with like a higher like caliber of people that I've ever worked with. And all of us were stressed and we trauma bonded together. And
Yeah.
so it was like, yeah, it was a cool thing to be a part of.
That sounds amazing. There's no trauma bonding like an event trauma bond. I've said this before on this podcast for any listeners who have been listening to me for any amount of time. I'm sure you've heard me say this 100 times. Everybody thinks that event planning is super fun and it's nothing but parties and you get to travel and it's like these cool things. It's like, no, actually, I spend weeks of my life leading up to an event, basically not sleeping and or crying a lot, messing up my diet because I don't have time to like make a healthy meal. And it's so trauma bonding really the demands that people put on you as an event planner. And this is an amazing job. I love my career. I'm so glad I came into this, but it is not easy. And I don't know, for those of you who are on YouTube, I literally have a gray streak in my hair that didn't exist a
Yeah.
few months ago.
I don't think, yeah, I think like things worthwhile aren't easy. And, there's a handful, there's so many problems with our industry too. But like that tangible satisfaction of like seeing things like physically manifest, I think is like something that personally drives me. And, I have friends who are very successful in like other fields and they're like, it just doesn't feel real. And then, I feel like some of them are jealous and I'm like, you should not be. But I think what also drives me is just like I love the variety of people you get to have interface with in events. And I think even, I still get to like dip into production and, if we need help on site or I need to come check it out. But like from like the vendors and like the load in AV people, like ranging to like clients and like the networking and the sales piece, I just like love meeting all different walks of life people. Like I always joke one of my favorite production memories, this is like a random sidebar, but the night before that event, I had a furniture crew in from Fort Worth and they had like literally just done like a 14-hour day. And they asked me if I wanted to have like a cigarette and a Gatorade with them at like midnight. And I was like, yes, I do want that actually. And I'm like honored that they would ask me to join in this, but
Yeah.
I think like, I'm just was there to try to help out any way I could for them that day. And I'm like, I think the more you do that for people, the more it comes back to you.
Yeah, I agree. There's no deeper friendship than in that moment of like pure exhaustion and you guys are like in it together.
Yeah, I'm like, we're all here. Let's just like be here for each other.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Alyssa, thank you so much. For those who want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go for more information?
I would say follow me on LinkedIn. I think that's the best place. I try to, like I said earlier, keep it as real as possible. And then you can follow other agency on LinkedIn or probably mostly Instagram, OTHR agency. And yeah, I'm just so thankful, Dora. Thanks for reaching out to me. This has been really fun, to get to know each other more and just grateful to be on the podcast.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I'm really grateful to have you on. And for our listeners, I can attest that Alyssa does write very real posts. I read them all. They're great. It is a true pleasure to interact with you, both in this format and also on LinkedIn. And I will link to your LinkedIn and also to other agencies, LinkedIn and Instagram in our show notes. So thanks to all of our dear listeners and Meeting Protocol fans for checking out this episode. Don't forget to go to meetingprotocol.org where you can sign up for our newsletter that includes links to all of our new podcasts, a CMP tip of the month, and tons of resources for all things related to meeting professionals in CMP. Thank you again.